Bonjour! We're in France. Oui, oui. Let's talk about episode 4 with Rachel and Gabby. Let's talk about the date with Jason and why Rachel is so angry. What's therapy got to do with it? Welcome to Reality TV Therapy with me, Dr. Diane. Welcome back. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a single episode of my Bachelorette recaps. But do you love my faux Chanel I had to get ready for our Parisian date? I will tell you this. Occasionally, as a psychologist and a couples therapist, I have moments of joy watching reality dating shows. And episode 4 gave me so much hope, particularly the date with Jason and Gabby, and I want to dive into that deep in this video. But I also want to talk about what I think is happening with Rachel and my hopes for the rest of the season. So, as you know, the show starts off with Rachel and Gabby flying to Paris. They have 2 special one-on-one dates with Jason and Tino, and I think these were fantastic dates. But let's start with the Gabby date with Jason, because for me it was the most memorable. At the start, you see lots of good partnering, good bonding. Jason and Gabby go and they're drinking champagne and they're got fitted for berets, which I thought was adorable. But Jason is shy, and in typical Bachelorette fashion, we see the lead saying, "But I need more from you." And because time is of the essence, that is, of course, true. But what I like in this combination with Gabby and Jason is that they're a really nice balance to one another, because Gabby is so exuberant. She's so full of joy and extroverted energy. But Jason is a more calming partner to him. He's a bit in the backdrop. But in terms of a couple, this is a really nice pairing, because oftentimes there's just not room or space to have 2 stars in any given relationship, and they might clash. So I really liked this mix of energy for both of them. And I could see Jason being the type of man who was a really good fit for Gabby. Now, I'm going to call Jason my front runner at this point, and I say that for a number of reasons. Well, on the dinner date in particular, let's start with that he brings Gabby along and talks about who he is. That in his present journey, that it's been hard for him, not in a way that he wants to quit, but in terms of energy. He talks about being a highly sensitive person. We call that an HSP. Who is that? Someone who gets overwhelmed easily, feels things deeply, and oftentimes HSP people have trouble with transitions. It takes them a little bit longer, and they like to know what they can predict, so what they can count on. And so Jason's talking about that he had a bit of a breakdown because, of course, the show is moving fast and there's lots of men with other big energy, and sharing a space in a house where there's not even beds for everyone, I can imagine would be incredibly dysregulating. So he said that he's not able to sleep for 3 days and that it's been rough for him. But I like what he also says to Gabby. He talks about his childhood a little bit, that growing up, he didn't feel good enough. And how relatable is this, Jason? Thank you for sharing. We appreciate that, because it's such a common experience for people. But that out of that, he tried to prove himself. He played tennis, but then he quit, wanting to fit in. And then Jason does something that we need more people to do. We need more people. More people. Okay, too many yeses. We need other men in particular, and women, to take note of this. What's beautiful here is that Jason explains to Gabby who he is. It's like he's saying, this is my manual. He says to her, it takes me a while to open up. But then he says not to worry in so many words because he's been to therapy and he's done inner child work specifically. What does that mean? Inner child work in therapy means you spend time talking to your younger self, your mini me, so to speak. And you literally say, no one was there for you, but I'm here for you now, the way that you would have needed me to be. And it's a deep form of therapy where we can really be in touch with what was missing and how we might need to be that person to ourselves now. And Jason goes on to talk about what he's learned to speak up for what he wants, that he has his power again, and that he wishes he had done that sooner when he was a kid. And he doesn't placate her in any way. He asks her, have you heard about inner child work? And they have this beautiful connection where Gabby, you can see she just lights up like, oh my gosh, you're speaking my language and I don't have to explain to you. And then we notice that it works because Gabby falls into Jason. She softens. You watch her body language. She leans towards him. And their eye contact is great. They're not skipping a beat. Nobody's looking away. But she goes deeper. And then to tell Jason about her own mother and her experiences and how we know Gabby's mother has rejected her, especially when she came back from college, but that she still loves her. Of course, that's natural. But Jason's response in that moment, if you really locked into his eye contact, that he felt compassion. And he said, I'm sorry that you went through that. But you get the feeling that he understands in a different way that we saw Eric last week. But his body language is so on point, and his words and his language match together. And in that moment, you get the sense that Gabby can take a breath, that she's been worried. We know that with Hayden last week, that maybe she is too much. But Jason understands her in a way and her journey, and he's not going to talk down about her or talk about how perfect his family is. So I really loved this date, and that Jason to me feels like an old soul, that he has done work on himself. A man beyond his years. He's also traveled. And even though he's a man of few words, they're important words. So I'm a Jason stan at this point. And Gabby, I love that she explains herself too, that she's done a ton of therapy work, that she has to learn how to receive love, and that sometimes humor and grace, and I said this from the beginning, are her ways of coping. But this is just a wonderful testament to the benefits of therapy. And as I said, as a therapist, that just lit me up. So lovely. I'd rather see people talking about therapy than being forced into therapy, which has been awkward in the past. Let me know what you agree in the comments. Do you agree with my sentiment? Have you tried therapy? What are your thoughts about it? Now, I want to get to Rachel because we can see that her anxiety is mounting. And even though we want to say this is a fresh start in Paris, she's carrying with her these 3 rejections in particular, and she's taking them oh so personally. So also now that Gabby has her own journey, I don't know if she's going to be able to feed off of Gabby's energy as much. And now she's got to reassure herself. But in particular, what was hard to watch is the group date. So Rachel comes to Gabby's group date where the guys are clearly very into it and they're boxing and having a good time. But Rachel is sitting there as if this is her date. And I think to myself, what are her expectations of coming into this date? And for me, this looks like an anxious reaction. You might agree that she is feeling rejected the way that Gabby felt rejected. But there's something about this that feels even deeper. That Rachel goes on to say, I didn't even have this experience with Clayton. That I've never experienced such rejection as I did with the 3 roses. And now this is all churned up again. So the anxiety hasn't gone away. it was masked for a little bit, even though she just had a great date with Tino. And I thought Tino was a lovely partner to her. Their date was very romantic. The scenery in Paris with the Eiffel Tower, that dinner date where they did talk about really important lifestyle choices. Do you want to have children? I want to have children, but my previous partner didn't support me in terms of my job. I think that was handled very well. So Rachel's not able to hold on to these good moments or these nuggets. She gets wrapped up into what's happening in the moment. And when the men don't meet her eye, when they don't welcome her, she feels very rejected. Now, she chooses then to confront the men. She's been up, obviously crying. She's very upset. And she comes back and says to the men, you've missed the assignment. You thought you were spectators on a date, but really my expectation was that time is short and you should be present with me. The question will be how the men take that, and it looks like they do respond, because in the next group date, they run to her. They all are, trying to do their best, despite the fact that, can we talk about what a weird group date that was? I loved when Zach said, what in the hell? Because that's what I was thinking. So I want to have one little caveat of a moment to talk about why would we do this pheromone experiment. Well, first they walk in, this couple is kissing. What the hell is that? So weird. I didn't even think it was actually good making out. And then we do the armpit smell test. Well, why? Because those are pheromones. Pheromones are something that you can smell in another person. And there was one psychological study that I wanted to mention to you because it's applicable here. It's called the sweaty t-shirt experiment. A Swiss zoologist by the name of Klaus Wendenkind set up a test of women's sensitivity to the male odors. And she had volunteers, like 50 women and 44 men, selected for their MHC gene types, okay? And what this study found, and they gave the men these t-shirts and said, wear them for 2 nights and then return them to the scientists. So in the laboratory, the researchers put on the t-shirts in this box with this smelling hole, and then the women were tasked with identifying who they were most attracted to. Intensity, pleasantness, sexiness. But the results were striking. Overall, the women preferred the scents of the t-shirts worn by men whose MHC genes were different from their own. So what's fascinating about this in terms of genetic choices and mating behavior is we tend to choose someone who's different from ourselves, and that's a good mate for us. That actually makes sense when you think of gene selection. Now, we didn't test the men's perception of female scents, but it makes sense from this one study, and I can only go that far, to talk about why pheromones are important. But you do kind of need to like the way a person smells, right? It is important. But let's come back to Rachel. There were these moments, the moment on the group date. I thought the date with Tino was great. But then we get back to the example with Hayden. And you can see that at that point that Rachel was not buying it. She was listening to his story, and can we talk about Hayden for a minute? I'm sorry, but if you have a dear dog that is everything to you, would you really leave that dying dog after everything that poor dog had been through, telling the details of that story, how his head caved in, way too much information, Hayden, and showing her a book? It felt like, let me tell you what a good guy I am. Let me tell you, let me show you. And then I'm going to be pissed because Tino interrupts my date. But Rachel then has this information from James, from Meatball, that says, you need to know this, that Hayden has been speaking smack about you. He's comparing you to his ex, and he hasn't had choice words. But we already know this because he had said to Gabby, he had offended Gabby the week before, calling her rough around the edges. And what I did love is all the men, Nate, even Ethan, someone else that was sitting there, I think it was Tyler, all looked at Hayden thinking, no, 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 don't go there. And Hayden said, well, she's the one who called herself rough around the edges. I didn't do anything wrong. But here is the subtle nuance, Hayden. Even if a woman called herself dumb or fat, it never gives you permission to then use those words back to her. So the men are saying, don't do that, dude. They're trying to stop him, and he can't stop himself. So Rachel has the information. She handles it quickly. She says, you need to leave. And I liked that. I mean, there wasn't a ton of drama about that. I think that she did a decent job there. But if I look at Rachel as a person, I want you to think of this phrase. And Stan Tacton, who is my teacher on attachment styles, called it allergic to hope. I think this is a perfect description. You can see Rachel wants love so badly. She wants a partner. She wants to be connected. She really wears her heart on her sleeve. She gets wrapped up in the romance of these dates. But she's also allergic to it. She, at the same time, wants to push it away. And so we see this roller coaster. I want it, but I don't. And that's this concept of being allergic to hope. Now, if that's you, and you feel allergic to hope based upon your history, your past, you want it, but you're afraid you can't have it, it's something to work on. Pay attention to your automatic thoughts. Pay attention to your expectations, because that would be the advice that I would give Rachel. And instead of focusing on everything that the men are not doing, focus on the men who really are there for her, because two men in particular at this point are front runners for me, and that is Zach and Tino. Avon might be up there too, but we haven't seen enough of him just yet. So those are my two top choices for Rachel based upon who both of them are. In the end, the highlights for the evening, though, a couple more kudos. I thought Nate with Gabby and that boxing date did a really nice job. He also confronted Hayden right at the beginning, like, dude, don't do that. That's not a good thing. And Gabby also noticed Spencer, thanking him for his service, for his military service, which I thought was a nice connection. We haven't seen enough of Spencer yet, too. Let me end with this, my reality check for the week. When it comes to therapy, if you're a man or a woman and you've admit that you've done your work, not just that you went to therapy, but you really stuck it out, people will see this as sexy, not weak. Polls have been done that say if you admit that you've been to therapy, you actually make a better partner, not a worse partner. Why? Because then on the receiving end of things, I feel like you have another way to handle things. You're going to cope better. You have some skills, some tools. You have someone else that you're going to talk to. If you can recall in seasons back, there was Ben on Tasha's season. He talked about being suicidal, being depressed, but he didn't talk about the work that he'd done. And so the work that Jason has done on himself, I just want to highlight in contrast, says, trust me, I'm a safe person. I'm here for you, and I'm not going to run away. So that's my final thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Stay tuned till next time.